Illustrator's transformation tools are incredibly powerful and allow you to create fun and exciting artwork based on primitive pieces of art. Using these tools, you can transform and reshape objects into the desired artwork that you would like. These tools can be a little tricky to use at first, so let's get started and I'll help you to uncover some of the secrets to using these tools. I'm beginning this video with the clover.ai file already open on my computer. And you can see here that I'm starting with a couple of really primitive and basic objects that I've already drawn on my screen. So the first thing I want to do is I want to start creating what's eventually going to be some clover artwork. And you can see right here that I'm starting with essentially half of a clover. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on that artwork using Command Spacebar on Mac or Control Spacebar on Windows. Just move this over here so we can see it a little bit better. I'm just going to close my swatches panel so that we can focus on the artwork here. Now what I'm going to do is with my selection tool, I'm going to click on this piece of artwork to make it active. And what I want to do is I want to create the right half of this clover leaf. Now you'll already notice that I've put a guide here, and I've essentially drawn half of this clover using the guide as the middle reference point. So I've essentially drawn the left half of this clover leaf. Now the first transformation tool that I'm going to use is found underneath the rotate tool. If you click and hold, you'll notice here that I have the reflect tool. And as you can see here with this object selected, the reflect tool is putting my transformation point right in the middle of my object. Now what that's going to do is it means it's going to transform this object based on that reference point. Well, I don't want to do that in this case. What I want to do is I want to transform it based on this right edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click once right on the guide to establish the transformation point. Then what I'm going to do is move my cursor down here and I'm going to hold the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows and the Shift key. And I'm going to click on that guide one more time. Now what that did is it transformed this leftmost object. Because I established the transformation point on the vertical guide here and then clicked in a vertical direction, it flipped that object onto the right hand side. And that essentially gave me a separate object. You'll see if I switch to my selection tool, I have the right half of the clover right here. Now I'm going to undo that move. And I'm going to shift click to select both of these objects. And then I'm going to merge them together using my shape builder tool. So I'm going to click on my shape builder tool and I'm simply going to click and drag across these two objects and now they're merged together as one unit. I'm going to go ahead and go back to my selection tool and I can see that the whole object is now selected. Now what I'd like to do is create the other leaves of this clover. So what I'm going to do is just move my artwork up a little bit, and I'm going to switch to my rotate tool, which is now located under the reflect tool. And once again, the reflect tool, when you first select it, establishes the transformation point in the dead center of the object. Now let me help you to understand how this works. This transformation point is saying that when you use this tool, this portion of the art is going to stay stationary. So you'll notice if I come out here, you want to think of this tool and all of these transformation tools as kind of a lever. So by having this as my transformation point, if I come out here and click and drag, don't click and let go of your mouse, but just click and drag, you'll notice that as I'm dragging in kind of a clockwise or counterclockwise direction, I'm rotating this object. And that reference point is staying where it is. And if I let go of the mouse, I've just transformed that object based on that reference point. Now I'm going to press Command Z on Mac or Control Z on Windows because to create this object, I really don't want to transform it off of the dead center reference point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click along this guide, but right down here at the bottom edge of this clover leaf. I'm just going to click once to reestablish the reference point. Now I'm going to come out here once again and click and drag right away. Don't click and let go. Click and drag. And if you hold down the Shift key on your keyboard as you drag, it's going to snap to 45-degree increments. And then before I let go of my mouse, I'm going to hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows. So I'm holding down Shift and Alt or Shift and Option. And when I let go, it'll transform it, but also make a copy. I'm going to do this one more time. This time, click and drag upwards, hold down Shift and Option or Shift and Alt, and you can create a third clover leaf, and that will then create the right portion of the overall design. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit, and you'll notice that way over here I have the stem of the clover. So I'm going to switch to my selection tool, and I'm just going to move this, just kind of reposition it. Might want to zoom in so we can see this a little bit better. And I'm just going to reposition this so that it works with my design. You can use your arrow keys if it helps to nudge them. That looks pretty good. Go ahead and zoom out. I'm using Command minus on Mac or Control minus on Windows. And then I'm just going to, using my selection tool, marquee this whole thing to select all the components at the same time. Now I'm going to grab that handy shape builder tool once again, and I'm going to click and drag across these shapes to merge those two shapes together. I'm going to then click and drag one more time to merge all of these pieces together as one unit. And you'll notice if you switch back to your selection tool, click off of this, you'll notice that this is now one piece of artwork that we can use. So I'm going to press Command 0 and Control 0 on Windows to fit my entire artboard to the window. And I'm just going to slide this up a little bit, not a whole lot, because I want to create kind of a design here. And I'm going to leave this as is, and now we're going to go and use the Rotate tool one more time. So with the Rotate tool selected, I'm going to go ahead and repeat the process here. Make sure our Rotate tool is selected, and I'm going to click right here in the dead center where the guides intersect. So I'm just going to click once, and that's going to establish my transformation point. Once again, I'm going to click and drag out here, hold down Shift and Option to make a copy, and once it snaps to a 90-degree angle, I'm going to let go. And I'm just going to then come up here to the Object menu, Object, Transform, Transform again. Notice that the shortcut is Command D on Mac or Control D on Windows. So if I use that shortcut, it'll just keep repeating that process. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to switch to my selection tool and change these colors a little bit. I click on this one up here at the top, come here to my swatches panel and click on a lighter shade of green. Then click on this one over here, maybe even choose an even lighter yellowish shade of green. And then what we can do is come over here and we'll actually choose maybe a different shade of green here as well. Now with my selection tool still selected, I'm just going to marquee all of these objects because I just realized they need to be a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and use my scale tool. If I click on that tool, you'll notice that again the scale tool uses that reference point or transformation point. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come out here. Again, this becomes the lever. The transformation point becomes the point that everything is transformed from. So I'm going to come out here and I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to start dragging in an upper left direction. And I'm going to hold down the Shift key to constrain the transformation so that the transformation is perfectly proportionate. And I'm just going to scale this up a little bit more. And once I'm happy with it, I'll let go of my mouse, then let go of the Shift key, and we'll see we scaled all of those items proportionately. Now what I'm also going to do, I'm going to click on my selection tool and then click off of all of these items. And what I'm going to do is click on the topmost object, and what I'll do is grab my Rotate tool, and I'm going to rotate this. I'm going to click on the guides where they intersect. Then I'm going to click and start dragging, hold Shift Option, and snap that to a 45-degree angle. Now what I want to do is scale that down a little bit. So using my Scale tool, I'm just going to come in here, hold down the Shift key, and I want it to be about that big. That looks pretty good. So I'm then going to grab that with my selection tool and move this into the upper left corner. And now that I see how big it is, you may decide that you want it to be a little bit larger or smaller. So you can then use your scale tool. What I might do is just click up here to establish my transformation point there. And that way when I start dragging, if I hold down the Shift key, it's going to scale from that point. Now what I'm also going to do is grab the Rotate tool, click in the dead center. Now we can use the Shift key as we drag and the Option or Alt key to make a copy. And I'll just then press Command D 2 more times to put those clovers in the upper corners of my design. I'll go ahead and change some of these colors a little bit. Something like that. Now to finish off this design, we can grab our rectangle tool, and I'm just going to click once with that tool, and that will allow me to determine exactly how big I want this shape to be. So I'll make this 10 inches by 10 inches, click OK, and I'm going to fill this with this dark green color that I haven't really used in this design. Then I'll go to my Object menu, choose Arrange, and then Send to Back. To prevent myself from selecting that background shape, I'm going to go to Object and choose Lock Selection. That way I don't accidentally select that later on. Now I'm going to switch back to my selection tool, and I'm just going to grab one of these objects real quickly because there are some other tools that we can use. If you click and hold on the scale tool, there's also a shear tool. And the job of this tool is to skew a shape in one direction or the other. So you can see my point of transformation is down here, and I'll leave it there. But if I come up here and I click and start dragging to the right, you'll see that I'm distorting this shape. And that's the job of that shear tool. The shear tool allows you to skew or distort an object as you click and drag. Now I'm going to undo that one because I really don't want to apply that in this case. The other tool is the Reshape tool. And to use the Reshape tool, what I'm going to do is grab my Direct Selection tool, and I'll just click and drag to marquee a couple of the points on this shape. And now when I grab the Reshape tool, you can click and drag on one of these anchor points. And the job of this tool is to help you to modify and distort the shape overall, but kind of keep the overall shape of the path without making it too modified as you would normally get with, say, the Direct Selection tool as is. So I'm going to undo that, keep it as is, and then I'll come back here to my Selection tool, select this object. Last but not least is a really great tool called the Free Transform tool. And the Free Transform's job is kind of the job of all these other tools meshed into one. So for example, if I hover over the corner of an object, I can click and drag to rotate it. If I click directly on the corner, I can click and drag to scale the object. I can click and drag on one of these corners, and if I click and hold with my mouse, I can then hold down the Command key, and this allows me to kind of distort in somewhat of a perspective orientation to create some really interesting artwork and really interesting distortions, with that tool. So I'm going to go ahead and undo a couple of times to get back to the artwork that we had finished previously. And I'll just deselect that so we can see the overall artwork we're using. I might want to hide my guides, so just go to the View menu, Guides, and choose Hide Guides, and now you get an idea of what our artwork looks like. As you can see, these tools are incredibly powerful to use, and once you understand how they work and some of the secrets to using them, you'll be using them more and more to create your own artwork inside of Illustrator CS6.